So now I have a third student in my class. What do I need to do? I will add a third student by adding a text view, a new text view. Doesn't seem very smart, right? Because if I add a new one, well, it's just kind of something that we know already how to do. So just define a new text view. The width is the wrap content because I want it to be exactly the size, exactly the width and the height of my text. And then I can say, oh, the text itself is the name of the third student, Anna. So I can save and I can run the application again. And whenever it restarts and launches the application again, I see the 3 students. But it's pretty ugly and it's quite not functional, right? Because whenever I have a new student, I have to add it by hand into an XML file. Doesn't seem like quite a smart move. So what we want to do is to have a real example of a set of students. And one simple example of that would be if I had in my activity an array of students. So I'll do the first example with a simple array of strings which represent the name of the students that I want to show. So I'll just create a Java array, like string array. And then I have all the students here, new string. And I'll just type in the name of those students. For example, I have Guilherme, I have Paulo, I have Ana, and I have Maria Lucia. Those are the 4 names of my students. So I can go back to my XML file and, well, I need to do something here. I need to replace all those text views by some kind of list. So if I'm showing a text component in my activity, what I use is a text view. If I'm showing a list, I'm going to use a list view. And whenever I hit enter, return, I have to choose the width and the height of my list view. So in my case, I want the list view to cover all the possible size of my parent, which is the linear layout. So I want to be as big as my parent, not as big as the content itself, but as big as the parent. In order to do that, what I need to choose is not wrap content to be just as big as the content. No, I want to be as big as my parent, match my parent. I always wanted to be as big as my parents. So, I don't know what about you, but I always wanted. So let me just close it correctly because I just did some mess here. Okay, so here's my list view. And I can just save it and I can just run it by clicking here, run app, and then I can just guess that it's going to work and show my list. Will it? Let's see. And there I have it, my list view. But it's not fun because there's no elements in here. There's nothing inside my list view. Of course there's nothing inside my list view. I didn't define anything. There's no relation between this list view and the student list activity students array. There's no connection between those 2 components. So remember, this is a component in the view itself. This is a component in the view itself. So for Android, this will be an object. This will be an object in the memory. So I might want to get access, to get hold to this list view. Something like, oh, please get me a list view. And this will be the students view. And then I want to get this list. Bring this list to me. Please bring this list to me. But how can I bring this list if this list has no name? It has no identifier. I have to identify it by some way. So what I need to do is to add an identifier. How do I add an identifier to a component in the view? I just say, please add an ID to it. And there's a pattern that we have to follow here. So if I'm creating a new ID for this component, what I'm going to do is at plus, because I'm creating a new ID, plus ID. So this is a new ID, plus meaning I'm creating this ID. And the name of this ID is the list that represents the students list, right? So it's the students list. So this is my students list. Now that I saved this file, now that I have saved this file, this is something related to my view, right? But it's an ID, it's something that I can identify and look for it somehow. Because I can look up because there's an ID, there's a name that is unique to this element. So let's go back to our code, and what we want to do now, I'll just remove this code here, and I'm gonna say, okay, please find view by ID. So I can just say, please find this view element by its ID, and I know its ID. Its ID is, I can just copy and paste here. No, don't paste it here, because if it changes there, then it would still compile, because if it changes here, it would still compile over there because it would be a string. So let's not match things to the strings themselves. What we do is we go to a helper class. Remember, when we wanted to say, please, students list activity, display to my end user this view here, the XML file, this entire view, this entire layout, when we said that, we used the R class. And the R class was automatically generated by our compiling phase. So the same way that this class generated an ID, something that represented a variable that represented the file, it also created something as r.id.students_list. Guess what? Students list is this students list, is the ID that we created. So I can just add the semicolon here, and now it's compiling. Although it is compiling, what happens now if I change this name? If by mistake, or just because I'm refactoring my code and I think this name is not useful enough, it's not clear to me what it's doing. So now it's the new students list. And I do new students list. Whenever I change this code over here stops compiling. So you get a compilation error if something is not matching. You get a compilation error. You don't get a runtime error. You get to find your mistakes, your binding mistakes, the code that binds an object that you're going to access during runtime to the components in the view. You get to get those errors during compile time, which is much better than during runtime, which is too late and you're going to end losing your client. So we get these errors during compile time. Pretty good. So now I have my list view, which is the students list. And I'm pretty happy with it. Woohoo! Not so far, because now it's complaining about it's not a list view. Why not? Well, because when you ask for a view by ID, it can be any kind of view. So it only knows that it is an Android view component. It doesn't know which specific type of view you have in your hands. So you need to add the cast. You need to cast it to list view, because you know that it is a list view. The compile time doesn't know about it being a specific type. Only you and me know about it. And that's probably a compilation type of error that we can get later. If we change this list view to something else with the same ID, things will still compile, but then you would get an error during runtime. So every cast is something like that, right? If something changes and you're doing a cast, then good luck. But that's the way the API works in Android. So we find by ID. The ID doesn't tell me which type it is. It just tells me that it's a view. So I just cast it to the view type that I want, and now I have my students list. Win! Now I can just run my code and guess that it's going to work. But it's just a guess, because no, it's not going to work. And here it is. It's pretty empty. Well, let me just restart it, sorry. And then here it is, and it's again pretty empty. So no luck so far. Why not? Because I have this array here, and I have this students list, and there's no connection between those two objects. If I remove this array here, no one is making any reference to this array, so there's no way that this array is going to be shown on our students list. So what I want to do for real, and that's real, I'm not lying anymore. What I want to do is, I want to tell my students list, please students list, add this student here to the list, and then add these other students to the list, and then these other students to the list, and then these other students to the list, or something like, or please just add all students to the list, and I'm happy, and we live forever happy, and so on. The only problem is that there's no such method as add. Why not? Because a component within a list is something much more complex than just a simple string. It's much more complex. An element within a list can be much more complex. It can be a text, a subtext, an icon, an image, an avatar, and a lot of information. So it's not just a plain string. So what we need to do is we need to adapt our array of strings to an array of list items. So for each one of these strings, we want to create a list item, which is just one text in our example. It's just one text. So we need to adapt an array into a list item array. And that's what we're going to do. In order to do that, what we're going to do is remove this line completely because it makes no sense. So we need to create the adapter. Please create an adapter that adapts strings into a list item with a string within it. So let's create an array adapter. And the array adapter receives an array of strings. So using generics, I'm saying, okay, it receives an array of strings. So when you create an adapter, you have to pass to the adapter constructor, the array adapter, an instance of an activity. Do we have an activity here? Yes, we have. It's myself, me, myself. That's me, this. I'm an instance of activity. I'm really happy with it. Then we need to tell the adapter, okay, you're going to get this array. Please display this array in this way, in this XML way. I have to show how he's supposed to display this element with a simple text. So we need to create a new XML file with just one text view. And we don't have this XML file here. And actually, by default, Android itself has this file, which displays just one simple string. So let's use Android's default, just display one string layout. So I'm gonna pick not our layout, this is the layout that we have. I'm not gonna pick this layout, I'm gonna pick a layout from Android itself. Android.r.layout.simple list item 1. That's a layout, just as our layout. We have a layout which displays a list view. And before that it displayed 3 text views, right? So Android by default comes with a simple list item layout, which displays just one string. So what this array adapter is going to do is, it's going to use our activity to map all the elements within our array of students. So that's the array of students. So for each student in array students in our array, it's going to use this layout, the simple list item layout, to map this information into the view. That's what this array adapter is doing. So that's our adapter. So I'm going to create this adapter here. It's an array adapter of strings. And the last step is, okay, now I need to tell my students list, please students list, use this adapter. Use the adapter that adapts all this array and this layout into view components. So let's save our code, run, and see now if it works. Let's check it. So we open the emulator, and there we have it. I have my entire list of contacts here. And now it's displaying like a real list in an Android application. Why? Let's check everything that we have done so far. So we went into our layout. Instead of adding to our layout 3 text views, a fixed content, we said, okay, we want some dynamic content into our list. So let's use a list instead of several contents, several elements. So we just added one single list view element. This element will be a list view object in the memory of our Android application during runtime. It will be whenever you load this layout, you will have this object into the memory. Okay, that's good. But then into the activity itself, when we load the activity, we want to display the data that we got from somewhere else. What is this data? We add the data as an array, our array of strings. And actually, in Java, we can do something like just this, and that's good enough. So just an array of students. So that's an array of strings. If you have an array of strings, you want to display this array into a list view, what you need to do is, first, you need the list view itself. So So let's grab the list view. How do we do this? We ask our activity, myself, do you have a method that looks for views by ID? You have. So we invoke find view by ID, and we pass the list ID. What is the list ID again? It's the ID that we created in the layout. We said, okay, the ID of this element is an ID that I, Guilherme, want to create. So I want to create this ID. The name of the ID is students list. And whenever I want to show and do something with it programmatically, I can do so by find this object in the memory, grabbing a reference to this object, and here's the reference to my object, the students list. But I cannot add strings to this object. View objects, they have nothing to do with strings or integers or something like that. View objects, they are related to layouts, to things that can be drawn. So to the views, to other views that can be drawn, and to other layouts that can be drawn. So in our case, we want to map each one of these strings into a different layout, a layout that shows just the content, just the string, a pretty simple layout for a list item. So this is the simple list item layout that Android comes with. So we can use this template in our case, and we can say, okay, I need to adapt my array of students into a template fitting each one of these students into a template, which is the default template for list items by Android. And I need to pass an argument, which is the activity itself. So I pass as the first argument for the constructor of an array adapter, myself, this. And when I have the adapter, I just need to tell, okay, this student list is going to use this adapter. So the student list has a reference to the adapter. So it asks the adapter, how many elements are there? It's pretty easy for the adapter to answer this question. It just takes a look at the array. Oh, there are 4 elements here. 4. So it draws the lines and it knows how big it should be, your list, if it has scroll or not. Okay, that's good. Then it asks, what is the content of the first element, of the first list item? That's the list view, needs to draw the first element. It asks the adapter, what is the content of the first element? So the array adapter will ask the template to fill its data based on the first element. And it just fills in Guilherme. And you can see that here, Guilherme. Then our students list asks the adapter, okay, now I need to draw the second element, the second list item. Please draw it for me. Then the array adapter does what? It just checks, what is the information? Oh, the information is just this string Paulo. What is the layout? The layout is this layout here, the simple list item, one layout. So it just merges the two and comes out the Paulo layout. This is a pretty layout, centered vertically with a vertical size which is fixed, and there's a padding here and so on. So there's a lot of information here. What else? This is the layout itself. Then it goes for the third element, and I'm sorry to you that I'm going to do it only twice again. So for the third element, it goes, the list asks the adapter, what is the third element? Please draw the third element for me. So the adapter uses both the layout, the simple list item 1 layout, and the data for the third element, which is just a simple string because it's an array adapter, merges the two into a list view item, which is this list view item, this complete list view item here. Then we have the fourth element. So the list view asks the adapter, please draw the fourth element for me. The array adapter asks for the template to be merged with the fourth element, which is Maria Lucia, and it draws the fourth view element here. This is the fourth view element. Then there's no extra element. Did I say 5 or 4 at the beginning? I hope I said 4. So there's only 4 elements because that's the size of our array. So if I add a new element here, for example, Carlos, and a 6th element, Daniela, and I just try to run again. So now that I click run, there's no change. Well, that's because I just did a shortcut and clicked here. That's a fast deploy. It just tries to change some information and to hot swap the code that you have changed. But because this activity was already initialized, there's no change to the data and there's no change to our view. So you have to be careful about that. When you're executing your code and you try to run this hot deploy, which tries to run just changes that you have applied, to just apply the changes that you have done. And sometimes those changes are enough, but sometimes if the application is already in the memory, it might not reinitialize some of the code that you have already run, and then you have, for example, in this case, no changes to deploy, and you have no effect here. So what I can do is, I can just close this application by coming here, and then just removing it, and then run the application again. Let me just run in the same device, and I can use the same selection for future launches. And now it's relaunching my application. So remember that some of the changes that you do, if you just do the hot swap of the code, it might not reflect the changes into your emulator. So be careful about that. Sometimes you get yourself like running, trying to run, make a change, trying to run. If it's an initialization code like this is, and your application has already initialized that activity, it might not run it again. So be careful about that. So in this case, it has restarted completely the application, and now we have the entire list with 6 elements now in our array, and therefore 6 list view items in our view here. So remember, the list view is really important for us because it teaches us how to use the IDs, how to connect the objects in the view with the business objects in our activity, how to adapt this information from one side to the other, and we'll be using it a lot throughout the course.